When I think of what it means to make it in life, I always come back to this idea of home ownership. Having a home that's completely yours sounds like it'd be a very freeing feeling, especially if that home is paid off. So far in my late teens and my early 20s, I've sort of just been saving to save, because I've been told that that's the responsible thing to do. But I haven't yet decided the route that I want to take with those savings. I've seen some people take the stock route, investing super heavily into the stock market in the hopes to grow their portfolio to one day live off that or retire. And I've seen other people take the real estate route, buying a home or homes and paying those off in the hopes of living rent free and potentially making some income off of those. And so I got to thinking, what would it take for me to go that second route? What would it take for me to afford a house? And then I got to researching. And even though what I found doesn't look good, I'll just be totally honest, I still have some hope for myself and for the rest of Gen Z. So we're in the middle of a housing affordability crisis. In fact, housing affordability is basically at an all-time low for renting and definitely so for buying. You've seen it, we've all felt it. If you have at least a couple years of experience with signing a lease and renting an apartment, you've seen our rents can soar every single year. And on top of that, it doesn't feel like wages on average are keeping up with those increases. According to Moody's Analytics, since 1999, actually the year I was born, rents have been up 135%, while wages have only been up around 77%. So there is and has been a steady outpacing of rents versus income for literally decades. And that outpacing is basically growing each year. And that's just rents. It's a similar story when it comes to buying a home as well. So this graph from long-term trends shows the home price to income ratio over the past 50 years. And so the number on the right is basically saying the average home in the US is valued at X amount of times the median household income. So back during the Great Recession, we had a peak of just under 7. So the average home was, I'm just estimating, 6.8 times the median household income at the time in 07 or 08. And nowadays, we've even blown through that. It looks like we're at around 7.5. So it doesn't look good. I want to just be honest. I've heard other finance creators put it bluntly, and I appreciate that. Clear value tax, for example, I appreciate you. The way he framed it was, if you bought a house pre-pandemic or even up to 2021, you kind of lucked out. Interest rates were at their all-time low. We're talking 2.5%, which is fucking dirt, honestly. And little aside, if you didn't know, the lower the interest rate, basically the more house you can afford, because the interest portion of your mortgage payment is going to be lower with the lower rate. So you had this perfect storm of dirt cheap interest rates and also home prices that hadn't yet inflated to the levels that they're at today. And on the other hand, here's the blunt part. Basically, if you didn't get in pre-pandemic, well then you kind of got left behind. And that applies to basically all of Gen Z. And man, I'm a little tight about it, to be honest. If I was born 5 years earlier, for example, if I was in the position that I'm in today in 2019, I would run it up. But you gotta play the cards you were dealt with. And so this point marks the end of the pessimistic part of this video. Because we can sit here all day and talk about how fucked the situation is for our generation. But that's honestly the other 90% of Gen Z social media. And I personally feel, is my opinion, if we come from those perspectives, then we're sort of just setting ourselves up to stay in those situations. And we obviously want to push past those situations. I know I'm going to do that. And just because we're left behind doesn't mean that we can't catch up, and doesn't mean that we can't one day afford a home. So let's run it. All right, obviously the best way to afford a home is to make a lot of money. Duh. I'm not gonna go too deep in this because you likely have an idea of your own career path, what to expect in terms of income, and then what you could maybe do to get that income higher. Some quick examples though: getting a master's, taking courses online to learn skills, working to get a promotion, or strategically job hopping every 2 to 3 years. There's a couple other things that I'd recommend focusing on top of just trying to earn more money. First one is zeroing out all your debts. To me, this is non-negotiable. I don't think I would personally buy a house while still having student debt, credit card debt, etc. That's because, obviously, all these debts drain your money on a monthly basis. And the less money you have disposable each month, the less chance you might have in affording your monthly mortgage payment. And then when you're buying a house, it's gonna severely limit the options you have and the disposable income you have to afford a mortgage. On top of that, while you're saving for your down payment, it's gonna severely limit your ability to do that, since you're also gonna have to allocate funds to pay off your debt on top of also saving. So I'd say, even before entertaining a house, nuke your debts, zero them out. Do what you gotta do, work extra if you need to, because that's gonna give you a clean slate to work on the second thing that I'm gonna recommend, which is saving for your down payment. Now there's sort of two routes here. People typically either put 20% down, which if you're looking at the current home prices today, it's a lot of money. Or instead of a traditional mortgage, people can get an FHA loan, which allows you to put 3.5% down. It's a lot less. The only catch with the FHA loan is you gotta pay PMI, or private mortgage insurance, because you're essentially viewed as riskier by putting down less than 20%. And this PMI is something that you gotta pay until you accumulate 20% equity in the home. But the thing with the PMI is, it's kind of just money burned. It's not going towards the equity of your house. You're kind of just paying it because you're quote unquote riskier. And so PMI rates can vary based on your credit score. So using our 500K house example, if you put down like 3.5%, with the top credit score, you'd pay around like $2,200 per year. And with the lower credit score, you pay around like $7,200 per year. So obviously there's pros and cons of putting down either 3.5%, 20%. One's more attainable, but that option also has the con of PMI. What I would do in my dream scenario is I would wait until I have that 20% just to afford making those PMI payments. Number 2, getting your score up. So like you saw in the PMI example, having a high credit score is really beneficial when it comes to home ownership. This is basically gonna ensure that you get the lowest mortgage rates, which is either gonna A, save you a ton of money over time, or B, help you afford more house. If you're like most of Gen Z, then home ownership is probably something that's at least a few years away, so you got some time to start working on your credit score. It's actually one of the easiest things you could do today to help you get on track for home ownership. Now there are 5 criteria that make up a credit score, shown here, but I've honestly found that if you just focus on getting a few things right, you can get your credit score up by a lot. All right, number 1, always pay on time. Basically with credit cards, student loans, etc., always be mindful of those due dates on those statements, and then always make sure to pay on time. As you can see, this is the biggest chunk of what comprises your credit score at 35%. My general tip here is to obviously don't spend more than what you can afford on those lines of credit, on those credit cards. And so secondarily, you can also set up those automatic payments on your lines of credit, on your credit cards, so that even if you somehow forget to pay, it'll just get taken care of. All right, second tip is to make sure you're not using too much of your credit utilization. As like an extreme example, if you had a bunch of credit cards and they were all maxed out, that would mean that you're at 100% utilization. And so basically the lower the utilization, the better. And going back to our first tip, that's why I pay my cards off in full every single month. Third tip, don't open up too much too fast. Personally, I love opening up new credit cards, partially because they offer really dope rewards, especially right when you sign up, and also because I know I can handle the responsibility of juggling like 5 to 6 cards at a time. But when I open up new cards, I typically follow the rule of not opening up 2 within like 6 months of each other. Opening up too many accounts too fast is generally seen as risky behavior by the credit bureaus. And that's honestly it. I've really only kept these 3 tips in mind, and currently my credit score is fast approaching like 800. For a while though, I was held back by the length of credit history criteria. That's because I'm fairly young, and after a few years of credit history, that typically becomes less and less a factor. So yeah, like I said, your credit score is one aspect of home ownership you can start working on today, even with $0 saved, and even if home ownership is like a decade away. Number 3, move somewhere cheap. So I live in Massachusetts, which according to this map, is the second highest cost of living state in the US behind Hawaii. And so as a Mass resident my whole life, and especially as a city kid, I've begun to wonder recently how viable home ownership is, both in my home state and then also just generally in the Boston area around the city. Because it's true, home prices are a lot cheaper in the states and the general areas that have a lot less going on. And if you grew up in like a suburban or rural area, if you enjoy it, and if you want to continue living there, I'd say you lucked out, because these areas are likely going to be where we, as Gen Z, probably get the best deals on homes and have the highest chance of becoming homeowners. For the fun of it though, let's go to one of these very highly priced neighborhoods to see what it's like. All right, so here I am in beautiful Brookline, Massachusetts, and this is true. If I had to pick anywhere to settle down, it'd probably be right here. I mean, look at this area, it's gorgeous. It's connected to the city of Boston, the train's like a block away. It's quaint, it's walkable. There's a park within like a walking distance of maybe like 5 to 10 minutes anywhere in the entire city. You can walk to get groceries, there's dope restaurants, things to do, but there's one thing that absolutely sucks in the city of Brookline, Mass, and that's the home prices. Let's run the numbers. According to Boston Magazine, the city of Brookline is the most expensive city in Massachusetts. Average home price here is $2.43 million. That's crazy. So what would it take to afford a home like that? Assuming that we put 20% down, which is, just a light $486,000, our total housing payment would be $14,517. And if we use the 28% rule, where our housing payment shouldn't exceed 28% of our before tax income, we would need a household income of $622,000 to afford the average home here in Brookline, Mass. So my point with using Brookline as an example is this: it costs money to live in a desirable area. Go figure. I think it's pretty safe to say that like 99% of Gen Z is not affording an area like this, not without some help, not without making it big or some like generational wealth. The truth is that on average, I feel like we're generally priced out of most of the more desirable places to live in terms of buying a home. We could probably swing it with renting, having roommates, That's what I do here in the city of Boston, and it works. But for buying a home, it's completely out of the question currently. And I told y'all, I'm a city kid, so for me, this is a big dilemma. Now, I don't gotta live in Brookline, but it's obvious that these areas are out of the budget for a lot of us. So what do we do? Option number one, like I said, you gotta move to the burbs. Personally for me, not really my cup of tea, but if you like it, that's cool. Things are definitely a lot cheaper the more suburban you get. Even in Massachusetts, if you go like an hour away from the city, you'll start to see houses in like the 300s, which is unheard of around here. Another tip is you could look for up and coming cities. Because cities like Boston, LA, New York, Chicago, they've all sort of experienced their growth and are more mature cities in that sense. As prices in those cities become too high for our current generation, and they honestly already have, naturally there's gonna be a migration away from those cities to a new crop of growing cities. Now when I Google this, I'm generally getting the list of cities that we've heard about for the past few years, the Austins, the Phoenixes, the Charlottes, and I'm assuming, since the general consensus is that these cities have already ballooned in price a ton over the past like 4 or 5 years, that in a few years, when a few of us might be more ready to buy a home, there might even be a new crop of cities that are now going to experience a lot of growth. So I'd say keep your options open. A few years down the line, when I'm more ready to buy a home, I'll probably take this route as well and look for some of those more growing cities. So to wrap everything up, I don't think all hope is lost for Gen Z when it comes to home ownership. Now, people have been saying for like past 4 years now that a housing crash is coming, that prices will correct, and that we'll basically be saved and we'll be able to afford homes. Personally, I'm not really holding out. I don't think it's gonna happen. And I think it's kind of silly to bank on a massive crash that may or may not occur. But what I do know is if I and if you implement these strategies that I've been talking about, that home ownership is basically an inevitability. I have zero doubts that I'm gonna be a homeowner in like 5 years. Could probably move to the middle of nowhere now and get some shit box. Like I said, that's not really me. So for now, we're saving up, planning for the future, and I hope you're doing the same. This is the end of the Sage. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch y'all later.